The music was too loud for anyone to notice what was happening.
Let her go. Now.
Crystal
Please
glasses
stop
chimed
this.
against each
She
other,
stays with me.
laughter
I
bounced
won't
off
allow
marble
it.
walls, and a pianist played something soft and expensive in the corner. Everyone was dressed in black and gold, talking about auctions and investments and people who mattered. Then his hand closed around my arm. Not gently. Not accidentally. Fingers digging into muscle that remembered exactly how much pressure it took to bruise. The same spot. The same grip. My body reacted before my mind did, heart stuttering, breath locking, skin burning under his touch. I felt him before I saw him. His breath was warm against my ear. Familiar. Unwelcome. You still wear that perfume, he murmured, smiling like we were sharing a joke. I always liked it. My heel caught on the edge of the rug as I stepped back. He tightened his grip to steady me, to control me. Anyone watching would have thought he was being kind. Careful, he said, voice light. Wouldn't want you to fall again. The crowd kept moving. A woman brushed past us with a champagne flute, apologizing without looking. A man laughed loudly nearby. No one stopped. No one looked closely. To them, this was nothing. To me, it was everything. His thumb pressed into my skin, just enough to remind me of hospital lights and antiseptic smells and lying through clenched teeth. My pulse hammered in my ears. I tried to pull away. He didn't let go. Then the air shifted. I didn't hear footsteps. I didn't hear a voice. I just felt a presence, something heavy, deliberate, impossible to ignore. A shadow fell across us. A man stepped between us. He didn't touch me. He didn't push my ex. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't even look at me. He looked only at the hand on my arm. Tall. Still. A tailored suit that fit too perfectly. His expression was calm in a way that felt dangerous, like a storm that hadn't decided to move yet. Let go, he said. 2 words. Quiet. Precise. The room kept laughing. My ex's smile flickered for the first time. And his hand loosened. I had spent months convincing myself this night was proof that my life had moved on. The invitation had arrived thick and embossed, the kind that implied security by default. A charity auction in a renovated hotel downtown, donors vetted, guests screened. The sort of place where people like him didn't belong anymore. I told myself that as I adjusted the strap of my dress and stepped inside, letting the wash of light and music swallow me whole. This was supposed to be safe. I'd rebuilt carefully. Quietly. A new apartment with better locks. A job where no one knew my past. Friends who knew pieces of me, but not the fractures. I smiled when I needed to, spoke when it was required, and kept the rest tucked away where it couldn't be touched. Most days, it worked. The room was beautiful in that deliberate way money creates: polished stone floors, walls lined with art that came with placards longer than their titles, waiters gliding instead of walking. I accepted a glass of champagne I didn't really want and positioned myself near a tall table, close enough to the exit to feel comfortable. That was my first rule. Always know where to leave. I was listening to a woman talk about coastal preservation when I noticed the silence inside my body. That instinctive pause, like an animal scenting smoke. My shoulders tightened. My grip on the stem of my glass grew firmer. I scanned the room without turning my head. That's when I saw him. Not the man who would eventually touch me, the other one. Across the room, near the far wall, half-shadowed by a sculpture that looked like twisted metal. He stood completely still. No drink in his hand. No conversation holding him in place. In a room full of motion, he was static. Out of place because he wasn't moving. People flowed around him, laughed near him, brushed past him, and he didn't react. His attention wasn't on faces or smiles or status. Gestures. Points of contact. I told myself not to stare. Told myself I was projecting, reading danger into neutrality because my body hadn't learned how to relax yet. Then a familiar laugh sounded behind me. Warm. Confident. Practiced. My spine went rigid. I didn't turn right away. I didn't need to. I knew that sound the way I knew the ache that settled into my ribs when it rained, the way I knew which stair in my old apartment creaked. Memory lived in muscle long after it left the mind. You always did like these things, he said, close enough that I could feel the vibration of his voice. Pretending you belonged. I turned. He looked exactly the same. Tailored suit. Perfect hair. The kind of face that made people trust him before he spoke. His smile was easy, affectionate, like we were old friends who'd simply lost touch. He leaned in as if to kiss my cheek. I stepped back. Don't, I said, quietly. Controlled. The way I'd practiced. He laughed, soft and indulgent. Relax. I just want to talk. My heart was already racing. This wasn't possible. He wasn't on the list. I'd checked it twice. I'd made sure. I don't, I said. You shouldn't be here. He reached for me then. Not abruptly. Not aggressively. Just a hand on my arm, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. The pain bloomed instantly. Not sharp. Not new. Familiar. My body remembered before my mind caught up, remembered the way pressure could turn into bruises, how long it took for the yellow to fade. I swallowed, forcing my expression into something neutral as his fingers tightened. Still jumpy, he said, smiling down at me. You never did grow out of that. The crowd flowed around us. Someone brushed past my back. A waiter paused, waiting for us to move, then redirected himself. From the outside, it probably looked like an intimate moment. A couple having a disagreement too private to share. I tried to pull my arm free. His grip adjusted. Firmer. A subtle correction meant only for me. You don't get to ignore me, he murmured, leaning in so only I could hear. Not after everything. The word everything pressed into me harder than his fingers. Everything was hospital lights too bright for my eyes. Everything was a doctor asking questions I couldn't answer without consequences. Everything was learning how to breathe shallow so it wouldn't hurt. I felt myself slipping, just slightly, into that familiar narrowing of focus. The world shrinking down to his hand, his voice, the exit I might not reach. That was when I noticed the man across the room move. Not quickly. Not dramatically. One step forward, then another, cutting through the space with intention. People parted without realizing why. He didn't hurry, but nothing slowed him down either. My ex noticed him at the same moment I did. What's this? He scoffed, glancing over my shoulder. You bring a bodyguard now? I didn't answer. I couldn't. My attention was locked on the way the stranger's gaze never left my arm. The exact point where fingers met skin. He stopped just short of us. Close enough that I could sense the heat of him. Close enough that my ex finally dropped his smile. The man didn't speak this time. He simply stepped closer. And in that small, silent shift of space, everything changed. The space between them collapsed without a sound. My ex released my arm as if he'd suddenly remembered he was holding it. His fingers fell away, leaving behind a dull throb that pulsed in time with my heartbeat. He took a half step back, smile reassembling itself, but it didn't quite fit anymore. "Misunderstanding," he said lightly, glancing between us. "We're just talking." The man who had stepped in didn't respond. He didn't even look at my ex's face. His attention stayed fixed on the hand that had been gripping me, as if cataloging it, memorizing it. Something in my ex's posture shifted. Not fear exactly, the kind that came when he sensed resistance that couldn't be charmed away. "We're leaving," my ex said, reaching for me again, then stopping short. His hand hovered in the air, undecided. "Go," the man said quietly. That was all. My ex laughed once, too loud, too sharp. "You don't get to tell me." He caught the man's eyes. Whatever he saw there erased the rest of the sentence. A moment later, he was gone. Not escorted. Not dragged away. He simply turned, melted into the crowd, and disappeared as if he'd never been there at all. The music never stopped. Conversations resumed without skipping a beat. Someone touched my shoulder to apologize for bumping into me. No one asked if I was okay. I stood there for a second longer, my arm burning, the space beside me suddenly empty. When I looked up again, the man who had intervened was gone too. I didn't see him leave. I made it to the bathroom on instinct alone. Locked myself into a stall, pressed my forehead against the cool metal, and counted my breaths until the shaking slowed. When I lifted my sleeve, faint red marks were already blooming, familiar in their shape. I waited until my reflection stopped looking like someone on the edge of breaking before I went back out. The rest of the night passed in fragments. Polite smiles. Automatic nods. I declined another drink, then another. I didn't stay long enough to hear closing remarks or applause. Outside, the air was cold and sharp. I breathed it in like it might burn something out of me. By the time I reached my apartment, my phone was already vibrating. His name lit up the screen. I didn't answer. It rang again. Then again. I silenced it and set the phone face down on the counter, telling myself I'd deal with it in the morning. Telling myself this was temporary, that this was just him recalibrating. In the morning, the missed calls were gone. Not deleted. Gone. I tried to call back. The line personal tone told me the number was no longer in service. I stared at the screen longer than I should have. Over the next few days, his absence grew louder. Friends who used to mention him casually, complaints, updates, gossip, stopped bringing him up entirely. When I asked one of them, carefully, she hesitated just a second too long before saying she hadn't seen him around lately. His social media vanished midweek. Not deactivated. Erased. Photos gone. Comments scrubbed. It was like someone had reached back in time and edited him out. I told myself there were explanations. People moved. People changed numbers. People disappeared from online spaces all the time. But the world around me started changing too. My landlord called to apologize for a maintenance issue I'd reported months ago and given up on. He scheduled repairs for the next day. Personally followed up to make sure I was satisfied. At work, the coworker who'd made a habit of cornering me in the break room was transferred to another department without warning. No announcement. No goodbye. On my usual walk home, a man who used to whistle when I passed crossed the street instead. Didn't look back. These weren't miracles. They were adjustments. Small corrections that smoothed the edges of my life just enough to notice. I should have felt relieved. I didn't. Relief comes with lightness. With release. This felt like pressure redistributed, not removed. like hands adjusting a grip I couldn't see. I started checking my locks again, counting footsteps behind me, paying attention to reflections in windows. Not because I felt hunted, because I felt watched. The sensation followed me everywhere. In grocery store aisles, in elevators, in quiet moments when there was no one around to justify the tension pooling in my chest. I'd catch myself scanning crowds, searching for stillness, for someone not moving. I didn't see him again. Not at first. But I felt the echo of him, like the aftermath of thunder long after the sound had faded. A week passed. Then another. I was brushing my teeth one night when my reflection caught on something beyond my own shoulder. A shape in the street below, parked beneath the dim glow of a flickering lamp. A dark car. It hadn't been there the night before. Or the night before that. I stood very still, toothbrush hanging uselessly from my fingers, and watched. The car didn't move. No headlights. No engine sound I could hear. Just a presence, patient and unhurried, like it had all the time in the world. I stepped away from the window, heart pounding, and forced myself to finish getting ready for bed. Told myself not to jump to conclusions. Told myself I was letting fear write stories my mind didn't need. But when I turned off the lights and checked again, the car was still there. Waiting. I told myself I wouldn't do it. I stood at the window for a long time, watching the dark shape of the car like it might blink first, like it might prove I was imagining things. It didn't. It stayed exactly where it was, angled just enough that I couldn't see inside. Eventually, the silence inside my apartment became louder than my fear. I pulled on a jacket, slid my phone into my pocket, and checked the locks twice before stepping out into the hallway. Every step toward the elevator felt deliberate, like I was crossing some invisible line I wouldn't be able to uncross. The lobby was empty. Outside, the night was cool and too quiet, the street washed in yellow light. The car sat at the curb as if it belonged there. Expensive. Immaculate. Unmarked. I stopped a few feet away. For a second, nothing happened. Then the window lowered. He was exactly as I remembered. Calm to the point of unnerving. Hands resting lightly on the steering wheel, posture relaxed, gaze already on me as if he'd been waiting. "You're watching me," I said. Yes. No denial. No surprise. Just confirmation. My throat tightened. He studied me for a moment, eyes flicking briefly to the pocket where my phone was, then back to my face. "Get in the car." "I'm not getting in." "Then we'll talk here." His tone didn't change. "But you won't like who might hear us." I looked around. The street was empty, but his point landed anyway. He wasn't threatening me. He was stating a fact. I hesitated, then opened the door and slid into the passenger seat. The door closed with a soft, final sound. He didn't start the engine. Didn't reach for anything. Just sat there, facing forward, as if we were waiting for a light to change. "You already know my name," I said quietly. "Yes, Marsha." Hearing it from him sent a chill down my spine. I'd never introduced myself. Never spoken to him at the event. There was no reason for him to know it. "How long?" I asked. 2 years. The answer was immediate. Prepared. Since the night you walked into the emergency room with a fractured rib and told the nurse you fell down the stairs. My breath caught. The memory hit hard, fluorescent lights, the taste of blood where I'd bitten my lip, the way I'd folded my arms to keep anyone from seeing how badly it hurt. I turned to him. "How do you?" I own that hospital, he said, as casually as if he were commenting on the weather. Among other things. The words settled slowly, rearranging everything I thought I understood. My fear flared sharp and sudden, then steadied into something colder. More focused. You've been watching me, I said. Yes. Why? Because someone needed to. That answer made my stomach twist. That's not your decision. No, he agreed. It wasn't yours either. I clenched my hands in my lap. My ex. You didn't just happen to be there. No. He found me because he was sent. The car felt smaller suddenly. Sent by who? People who wanted leverage. He was useful to them. Charming. Connected. Disposable. I swallowed. And you? I was already dealing with them. He didn't elaborate. I waited for more. The night of the event, I said. You stepping in. That wasn't personal. He turned his head then, just enough to look at me directly. No. The honesty in that word was more unsettling than any lie. He violated a boundary in public, he continued. That made it actionable. Actionable. Like a policy. Like a checklist. You were watching my arm, I said. Yes. Not my face. Faces lie, he said. Hands don't. A shiver ran through me. What happens now? I asked. He considered the question for a moment. Nothing changes. Except you're aware of me now. And him? My voice dropped. Where is he? Somewhere he won't be touching anyone again. The words were calm. Measured. Final. My heart hammered. What does that mean? It means you don't need to worry about him. I am worried, I said. You won't tell me how. No. The refusal wasn't dismissive. It was deliberate. Why? I pressed. Because the details aren't for you, he said. And because knowing them wouldn't make you safer. I laughed once, breathless. You don't get to decide that. I already did, he replied. Silence filled the car, thick and heavy. I realized my fear had shifted again, not receded, but sharpened into awareness. This man wasn't unpredictable. He was controlled. And that was worse. You've been adjusting things, I said. My landlord. My job. Yes. Without asking. Yes. You think that's protection? I think it's efficiency. I stared out the windshield, at the empty street, at the city I thought I knew. You don't even know me. He watched me for a moment. Then, I know you don't cry in public. I know you change your route home every few weeks. I know you sleep on the side of the bed farthest from the door. I felt exposed in a way I couldn't describe. I know you don't believe you deserve help, he continued. And that's why you needed it. I shook my head. This is insane. Perhaps, he said. But it's over. What is? He won't come back, he said. Not to anyone. I turned back to him. You promise that? I don't make promises, he said evenly. I make outcomes. He reached for the door handle then, opening it for me without looking. You should go inside. I hesitated. And the car? It won't always be there, he said. Only when it needs to be. I stepped out onto the pavement, my legs unsteady. Before I could say anything else, he added, This wasn't about anger, Marsha. It was about procedure. The window rolled up. The engine started. The car pulled away smoothly, disappearing down the street. I stood there long after it was gone, the night suddenly too quiet, replaying his words over and over. Somewhere he won't be touching anyone again. I didn't know what he'd done. Only that whatever it was, it had already been decided. He didn't come back the next night. Or the one after that. The space outside my building returned to normal, cars passing, strangers parking and leaving, nothing lingering long enough to set my nerves on edge. I told myself that was proof he'd meant what he said. That the car had only been there because it needed to be. That should have comforted me. Instead, the absence felt like a held breath. It was 3 days later when the envelope appeared. No stamp. No return address. Just my name written neatly on the front, slipped halfway under my door like it had always belonged there. I stood staring at it longer than I should have, listening for footsteps that weren't there. Inside were photocopies. Hospital intake forms. Redacted, but unmistakably mine. The date circled in ink. A nurse's note in the margin: patient appears guarded, denies domestic violence. A security still from the emergency room entrance, timestamped, showing me hunched slightly forward, one arm wrapped around my ribs. My hands shook as I turned the page. A police report I never filed. Or rather, one that had been started and quietly closed. The officer's name. The reason listed: insufficient evidence. Document, private investigator letterhead, dates spanning months, a list of incidents, addresses, times. He had known. Not guessed. Not assumed. Known. There was a final page at the bottom of the stack. A single line, typed. Meet me where you feel safest. Below it, an address. I didn't recognize it at first. Then I did. The small gallery by the river. The one I went to on Sundays when I needed quiet and didn't want to be seen. I hadn't told anyone about it. Not friends. Not co-workers. I went. He was already there, standing near a sculpture made of twisted metal and light. The space was nearly empty, sunlight filtering through high windows. He turned as I approached, as if he'd heard me from across the room. You went through the files, he said. Yes. You're angry. Yes. He nodded once, accepting that. Good. I held up the papers. You've been documenting my life. I've been documenting his. And I was just collateral? No, he said calmly. You were the constant. I swallowed. How long? Since before you left him, he replied. Since the first time he used your name to gain access to something he wanted. I felt the floor tilt slightly. What does that mean? It means your relationship made him visible, he said. And visibility attracts attention. You're saying this is my fault? No, he said immediately. I'm saying it made him careless. We stood there, surrounded by art no one was looking at. You control hospitals, I said. Landlords. Police reports. I influence systems, he corrected. Control is inefficient. I laughed bitterly. You erased him. I contained him. That's not better. It's necessary. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the weight of certainty in his posture. The absence of doubt. You knew about the abuse before I even admitted it to myself, I said. Yes. And you did nothing. I did plenty, he replied. Just not where you could see it. He gestured around the gallery. I wait. I collect patterns. I let people reveal who they are. And then? And then I decide if they're a risk. The words settled heavily between us. The party, I said. That was the line. Yes. Why? Because it was public, he said. Because he put his hand on you where witnesses could have seen it and chose not to. Because power relies on silence, and he assumed he still had yours. I remembered the moment clearly now, the way my ex had smiled, confident, certain the world would keep looking away. Stepping between you mattered, he continued. Not because of force. Because of visibility. It told him his access was over. And me? I asked quietly. What did it tell me? He met my gaze. That you were never alone. The words hit harder than I expected. Relief and grief tangled together in my chest. And yet, I said, I was never free. No, he agreed. Not while he was active. I folded my arms, grounding myself. So what happens now? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into his jacket and removed a phone, placing it on the pedestal beside the sculpture. You have a choice, he said. I eyed the phone warily. About what? About visibility, he replied. Up until now, my involvement has been invisible. Systems adjusting. Threats neutralized quietly. And now that's no longer sufficient. My pulse quickened. Why? Because he wasn't acting alone, he said. And because people are asking questions. What kind of questions? The kind that notice when patterns stop, he said. The kind that wonder who intervened. I shook my head. I didn't ask for this. I know, he said. But it's already happening. I took a step back. What does that mean for me? It means protection is no longer something I can do without consequence, he said evenly. And neither can you. The gallery felt too open suddenly. Too exposed. You're saying I'll be seen, I said. Yes. As what? He watched me closely. As someone under my protection. The phrase sent a chill through me. And if I say no? I asked. Then I step away, he said. And the world returns to its original state. I understood then what he wasn't saying. The weight of the absence. The danger in normal. This isn't freedom, I said. No, he agreed. It's security. I stared at the phone on the pedestal, at the quiet certainty of the man in front of me, at the invisible lines that had been drawn around my life without my consent. He broke the silence softly, decisively. This protection, he said, is no longer invisible. And I knew, in that moment, that whatever I chose next would change everything. The threats didn't come to me first. That was how I knew they were real. They surfaced in the background of my life, like pressure changes before a storm, subtle, deniable, easy to miss if you weren't looking for them. A broken mailbox replaced without explanation. A neighbor asking strange questions about my schedule. An unfamiliar number calling once and hanging up. Then the message arrived. It wasn't violent. It didn't need to be. Just a single sentence, typed in a plain font, delivered through a channel I hadn't used in years. You're protected by the wrong man. My hands went cold. By the time I looked up from the screen, he was already there. Not beside me. Not behind me. Across the room, leaning against the doorframe as if he'd always been part of the space. Calm. Impeccably dressed. Watching my reaction with clinical interest. They've decided to test boundaries, he said. You knew this would happen, I replied. Yes. And you still escalated. I contained, he corrected. They escalated. He crossed the room slowly, every step deliberate, the air shifting around him. I realized then that I'd never seen him hurry. Even now, with the threat hanging between us, he moved like time bent around him, not the other way around. This isn't just about me anymore, I said. It never was, he replied. Not the cause. The next move happened in daylight. A charity luncheon. Public. Visible. The kind of place where reputation mattered and violence was assumed impossible. I was told to attend, not asked. The dress was already laid out when I arrived at his building, tailored to fit me perfectly. I don't like this, I said. You don't have to like it, he said. You just have to stand still. The room went quiet the moment we entered together. I felt eyes on me, immediately curious, assessing, recognizing the shift without understanding it. He placed a hand lightly at the small of my back, not pushing, not pulling. Anchoring. A man across the room stiffened. I recognized the look, calculation curdling into caution. This is unnecessary, I whispered. It's required, he murmured. They need clarity. We stopped near the center of the room. He didn't raise his voice when he spoke, but it carried anyway. Anyone who touches her, he said evenly, answers to me. The words landed like a verdict. No one challenged him. No one laughed it off. The silence that followed wasn't awkward, it was obedient. I felt it settle over the room, heavy and irreversible. In that moment, something inside me loosened. For the first time in years, I wasn't scanning exits. I wasn't calculating risk. I wasn't bracing for impact. I was safe. And the realization terrified me. Later, in the quiet of his car, I finally spoke. You claimed me. Yes. In front of people who will never forget it. Yes. That wasn't protection, I said. That was ownership. He turned to look at me fully then. Those aren't opposites in my world. The honesty of it stole my breath. This ends one of two ways, he continued calmly. You step fully into visibility. Or you walk away now, before this becomes permanent. You're offering me a choice, I said. I'm making the consequences clear, he replied. The difference matters. I stared out the window at the city rushing past, small, quiet, unnoticeable. That life was already gone. I could feel it. If I leave, I said, will you still protect me? For a time, he said. Long enough to ensure you're not used as leverage. And after that? He didn't answer. The silence told me everything. When the car stopped, I didn't move to open the door. I stayed where I was, heart racing, fear and desire tangled so tightly I couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. He waited. He always waited. Finally, I met his gaze. I don't think I ever really had the option to leave. A flicker of something, approval, maybe, crossed his face. No, he said quietly. You didn't. And in that moment, I understood the truth I'd been circling since the night he stepped between me and my past. I hadn't chosen to stay. I had already been claimed. The apartment was quiet when I arrived. Not cold or sterile, not the way I had imagined it would be if someone with his reach and control owned it. It was warm. Lived in. Books lined shelves in no particular order, evidence of people who had read them. Art hung on walls, chosen, not expensive. The kitchen smelled faintly of coffee, not antiseptic or perfection. I set my bag down and looked around, trying to reconcile this calm with the man who had erased threats, shifted power, and dictated the fate of my ex with nothing more than a glance. Here, in this quiet space, he felt human. Terrifyingly human. He didn't rush me. Didn't expect gratitude or obedience. He simply leaned against the window, hands crossed, eyes on the city beyond. I need to know, I said finally, that this is temporary. That it isn't permanent. He didn't look at me when he answered. Protection doesn't come with an expiration date. I swallowed. But it isn't love. No, he admitted. It's the first thing that ever kept you alive. I walked through the apartment, fingertips brushing over surfaces, letting the quiet anchor me. I had spent years waking up to threats, convincing myself that survival was all I could hope for. Here, under his protection, that fear didn't vanish, it shifted. It was still there, still gnawing at the edges, but it was organized, accounted for. Managed. Calculated. And I realized I had never known the absence of constant danger. Never known true safety. I went to the window, looking down at the street below. Every shadow felt softer, less immediate, but I knew they were only quiet. The world beyond this apartment hadn't changed. The people who wanted leverage, who tested boundaries, they still existed. They still moved. The difference was, someone else now managed the consequences. I wondered if that was the cost of freedom. That someone else held the power to keep me alive, while I was left with the knowledge that it wasn't my life that was in control. He approached quietly, placing a hand on the back of my chair. Not heavy. Not restrictive. Just present. Anchoring. You have a choice, he said. You always have a choice. I understood the illusion. The choice wasn't really a choice. Not if I wanted to remain alive, not if I wanted to walk through the city without fear, not if I wanted to be the person I had spent years pretending to be. I nodded, more to myself than to him. I get it. He didn't press, didn't celebrate. He simply stepped back and allowed the silence to settle. It was heavy, but steady. I sat there, letting the weight of it sink in. Letting myself feel the strange mixture of relief and confinement. The safety that didn't feel like freedom. The control that felt like care, though not love. For the first time in years, I didn't check the locks. Didn't scan the street for shadows. Didn't calculate every interaction. Not because the danger was gone, it wasn't, but because I knew someone else was holding it at bay. I walked through the apartment again, stopping at the photographs, the books, the small personal touches. Realized then that the man who had claimed my protection was also human. And terrifyingly, impossibly, he had chosen to anchor himself to me not out of passion, not out of whim, but out of recognition. Recognition that I was rare. That I mattered. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring. Threats could rise again. The ex, his allies, anyone seeking leverage, they could test boundaries once more. But for now, there was quiet. Calculated quiet. And that was enough to hold me steady. I settled onto the couch, tracing my fingers along the soft fabric, and let myself breathe. Slowly. Carefully. The city lights shimmered outside the window, blurred by the glass, distant yet alive. I understood that safety and control were not the same as love, and freedom was not the same as life without fear. But for the first time, I didn't feel immediately at risk. And that, in its own dark way, felt like survival. I glanced toward the empty space by the window where he had been moments before. The apartment was quiet, the city beyond unaware, and yet I knew. The most terrifying part wasn't that he stepped between us. It was that I knew he always would.